sound of shells, I will return to duty. For my legion, for Vulcan, and for him on Terra, I walk again to war.
Welcome back. Thank you everyone who's been joining me since last time. Thank you everyone who's been giving all my videos from recently so many views. It's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. Today I'm going to be really straightforward and take you through the process of the first ever full diorama that I have completed. It's not much, but it was a bit of a foray into the world of making a scene rather than just a simple model, which is something I've wanted to do for quite a long time. I have a couple of other dioramas on the go hidden in my cupboard and stuff like that, so hopefully this will be a step into that realm of getting more story-based models finished. What I've done with this one, and you'll see in a sec, is I've put my Deredeo Dreadnought inside a cave because the story of ancient Rylanor sort of inspired me to do something that looked as if a Dreadnought had been left behind and then his legion had returned to the same planet for war, and he's suddenly heard the sound and he's woken up to return to battle. So hopefully as I go through this you'll see where it all comes together and where my inspirations and what sort of ideas I had and what all came together. And if you're inspired to make your own one, let me know how it goes, because I am really happy with how this one works. And it's the first time I've used electronics in a model, although they don't really come across on camera, as you'll see later on. So let's see how it came together. So for this to even work, I had to obviously finish the model, because you'll see from the rest of the Deredeo ones, which are available in a playlist on my channel, that I hadn't really got very far with it. I've got the model pretty much about a year and a half ago now, and I have done a couple of installments of trying to paint it in different ways. Used an airbrush, that didn't work, used normal brushes. Got a good paint job, but the details weren't there. So what I wanted to do was go through and add some colour, because I was going to dull a lot of this down with shade, as you'll see in a minute. So I went through and added some really nice bright colours to the cabling on the plasma guns, because that was one of the best places to get a lot of the detail that I wanted. And then whenever I got most of that colour through on all of the little cables and all of the details you can see on both sides here, I then went through with some Nuln oil and dulled it all down so that the colours would blend together and it looked like a shadow that would have been cast by the cave whenever it all goes around the unit. And from there it was on to probably the part of the project that I was most excited in and that had the most inspiration for how this all turned out. I realised through the earlier stages of this that I hadn't actually painted a 30k model before, and technically because this is a resin Forge World Dreadnought, it's a Horus Heresy model, it's not like 40k. So I got my Typhus Corrosion out, and I decided while I was painting this that I was going to take the really good paint job that I got before, brush a lot of metal over. You can see I've dry brushed some metal effects over the armor, but then I took the Typhus Corrosion and I painted some streaks and some grime and some rust and dirt and wear, not necessarily to imply that ceramite would rust, but to just sort of imply that dirt and rot and stagnation basically have taken over this unit while it's waited for thousands and thousands of years inside a cave for his legion to return. And I really love how this came out. I've never used Typhus Corrosion in this way before, but I ultimately really appreciate the kind of streaky, disgusting outcome that you can see here. And basically when I was done with that, I got some little tufts, grass tufts, and I placed them on the model in different places just to look like, again, it had been standing still and waiting for a long time, and plant life had started to grow all over the arm. And every now and again, whenever I'm painting something like this, I get an idea to use one of my old secret weapon paints from my old collection of stuff that was given to me a few years ago. And one of those paints is Calfin Brown, which I'm fairly certain is discontinued, at least in the way that I have it. It's kind of oil based instead of the normal current Citadel paints. And I use that to go over the grime as if layers and layers had formed, and the newer, more recent grime was lighter in colour. And I really love the effect that got in the end. It looked a bit strange when it was drying, but then eventually whenever the whole thing had settled in, you got this layered effect with some really dark, dirty old colours in the back and some lighter, more recent rot in the foreground, which, you know, obviously when it sounds gross, it actually looks really fantastic for a model that's meant to be old and worn and basically neglected for thousands of years. And from there it was quite simple just to carry on with some detail work, like the red in the missile pods and the Hellfire launcher. And then I went and got a sponge,
tapped it in some paint, dried it off, and then used that to go on top of the wear and tear to look like the paint on the armor was gradually being worn away by the elements and the dripping water and the different sort of harmful chemicals that you'll get over a long period of time inside a cave that's got a lot of water and old stagnant rain, different things like that sitting around in it. I was really, really happy with how it looked in the end. One thing though that I wasn't really happy with, and this kind of crops up when I was watching some painting videos while I did this project, was that the plasma guns, and all of my plasma guns really are a bit lackluster, and they don't really hit with the right level of punch that you want from those colours. So I went back over the blue that I'd put on them before as like a primer, and I covered them in white following a Midwinter Minis guide. But even then, after following that guide, the eventual outcome wasn't what I went with anyway. What I decided I would go with while I was painting these was that the plasma coils were just warming up. There's a bit of a redness to them as the heat builds up. They're not quite white hot yet, but there's a red hot glow coming out of that blue that naturally rises up. So I used some dual effect paints to try and get this with some Soulstone blue on top of that white. It was just a standard white. I think it was some Pallid Witch Flesh or Corax white, just to get a nice glowing shiny blue on top of a pale white background. And then on top of that I started layering with red to try and build that sense that there's heat coming out, because these plasma coils haven't run for years upon years upon years. I couldn't start layering that red until I had let the plasma coils dry with the Soulstone blue. So what I did was I took the little plinth that I had bought in a shop. I've seen these on sale for ages and I've always wanted to do something with them, and I finally bought one and decided I was going to do this. I pulled one of the corners out to make an open sort of platform rather than have it enclosed on four sides. And what I did was I just spread the whole thing with PVA glue, took some of my old painting sheets that I leave beside my desk, tore them up into segments and started crumpling them into different random shapes, and then gluing them down with loads upon loads of PVA glue. The PVA was on top, underneath, around, everywhere on this so that it would harden and leave a nice tough surface. Then I got some foam board, and I used the foam board while being interrupted by my wife to cover in two of the sides. And the plan was with this to have one of the sides covered in rock, which was made of the recycled paper, and the other side to just be plain black, as if it's the dark abyss of this cave that the Dreadnought has just suddenly emerged from and is standing on the edge of. And with me not being the most precise, obviously hardly any of this lined up, but I knew because of the random shapes of the paper that I would need to fill in some gaps. So I grabbed my liquid green stuff and my terrain tool, and I pasted it on using my finger as well to just shape and fill in the spaces between the rock, or the paper rock, sorry, the wood and the edge of the foam board. So it looked like it was all sort of an enclosed unit that slid and sat together nice and flush and wasn't interrupted by breaks or holes or gaps or anything like that. And with the whole thing sealed in, I moved on with trying to get that shape that I was talking about earlier. So I filled in the back corner, or the back side of it, with more paper to block up all the way from the floor to the ceiling as if it was a rock wall. And then, as you can see there behind it, I left a completely blank space, so it looked as if there was a cave mouth that this Dreadnought had just walked out of. And obviously I was doing some positional testing as well, just to see how that would look in a final version. Happy with that, I masking taped up, did some zenithal highlighting ready to paint it, pulled it all off with some black and white, and I think it looked pretty good. I then just used some null oil and egg arc shade to get some shadow washes, keep the raised edges bright, keep the recesses dark, and then with some horrible off-camera drilling and DIY work, I fitted the light in the top so that it would shine down just in the front corner. I'm definitely not going to show you how that went. From there, I wanted to put in the basing stuff so I could finally get the Dreadnought mounted properly when this was done. So that was just PVA glue and some little basing sand, flock, tufts, sponge, and my token basing spray, which just is a balsamic vinegar bottle filled with different glues and washes. At that point though, my camera died, and off screen I did some layering of different blues, greys and yellows to get the rock colours, and I stuck in all those different basing effects that I talked about just before. And thankfully by that point the plasma coils had dried, so I went in with some blue shades again to darken that down and feel like these were just coming to life again. And I then grabbed some Evil Sunz Scarlet, started the dry brush over the top and over the top of the actual weapon itself, just to simulate that heat, and put that red glow on the chassis of the Dreadnought as well, just to imply that this thing is getting its systems going after thousands of years of waiting. And then it was time to just mount it in the box and see how it all looked together when it was glued in place. The model and the diorama itself, I think, came out really well. I'm really pleased with the glow, I'm really pleased with the waking of those plasma coils, I'm really pleased with the wear and the cave and the old sense of it all, and especially from a slight distance it all comes together into this image of something waking up after just having been abandoned for such a long time. Like I said earlier, the electronics weren't quite strong enough to show up on camera. You'll see here in a second I do manage to get a little bit of the effect of that light. I got a flickering electric tea light, managed to make that work here, as you can see. But if I was doing this again, I would probably try and up the current, or at least try and use more lights so that I could get a little bit of a brighter effect. But in person, especially with a low level of light, you can see that this does come across quite well, and it looks like the sunrise on a planet that has been torn apart by war. And that's exactly what I was going for. It's just unfortunate that I can't convey that quite so well. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments, and I'll try and take your feedback on board next time I make another diorama.